"Let's see if they survive without us now," said the son, but the father was hiding a great inheritance. Arthur Miller gripped his wife Eleanor's trembling hand tightly as he watched his son's car disappear around the dusty road's curve. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, and the only shade came from a power pole stretching a few feet over the cracked asphalt. "Let's see if they survive without us now," were the last words Derek had shouted out the window before speeding off and vanishing from sight, leaving the two elderly folks with just a worn-out suitcase and the weight of rejection. Eleanor dried her tears with the sleeve of the flowery blouse she'd worn for 3 days straight. Her grey hair, tied up with a faded scarf, was damp with sweat and despair. Arthur adjusted the straw hat shielding his weathered face and felt the yellowed envelope he kept in his shirt pocket. A secret he'd carried for over 20 years, now weighing heavy as a stone on his chest. "What are we going to do now, Arthur?" Eleanor whispered, her voice choked. "Where will we sleep tonight?" The old farmer looked down the road, stretching in both directions. To the north, the town of Asheville was 15 miles away. To the south, only small homesteads and farms scattered across the Appalachia countryside. His feet already ached inside his worn boots, and Eleanor could barely stand after waiting for hours under the sun. "We'll manage, old girl," he said, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "We always have." But inside, Arthur knew the situation was more serious than it seemed. Derek had planned everything down to the smallest detail. The week before, he'd convinced his parents to leave the house for a supposed renovation on the property. Now they'd discovered their son had emptied the bank accounts and was trying to sell the family home without authorization. The sound of an engine approached, and Arthur raised his hand, signaling the truck coming down the road. The vehicle slowed and stopped a few yards ahead. A middle-aged man got out from the driver's side, dark-haired and with his uniform smudged with grease. "Good afternoon, Mr. Arthur," said the truck driver, recognizing the farmer. "You out here? Something happened?" "Hey, Butch," Arthur replied, relieved to see someone he knew. "We're kind of needing a ride into town." Butch noticed the suitcase next to the couple and how worn out they looked. He'd known Arthur for years, ever since he made deliveries to the family farm, and he knew something was very wrong. "Of course. Hop in. I'll drop you wherever you need." During the drive to Asheville, Eleanor recounted in detail how Derek had shown up last Thursday with a story about fixing up the house. He said he'd gotten a promotion at his job in Savannah and wanted to give the property a new look as a gift for his parents. "He said it was going to be a surprise," Eleanor said, shaking her head. "That we had to leave for a week while the workers did their thing. He even booked this guest house in Asheville for us to stay at." "And you believed him?" Butch asked, frowning. "Derek was always difficult," Arthur admitted. "But he's our son. We always wanted to believe he could change." Butch knew Derek's reputation around those parts. The young man had moved to Savannah 5 years ago, saying he was going to work for a construction company. But everyone knew he spent more time in bars and betting parlors than working. In recent months, he'd shown up at the farm several times asking his parents for loans. "And now you found out he—" Butch let the sentence hang. "Emptied our accounts," Arthur finished, his voice bitter. "We went to the bank this morning. $50,000 we'd saved up. All gone." "My God," Butch muttered. "And the house." "He's trying to sell it," said Eleanor, starting to cry again. "The bank manager told us. He said Derek showed up there the day before yesterday with some papers, trying to transfer ownership." Arthur clenched his fists. What Derek didn't know was that the deed to the farm had always been in Arthur and Eleanor's names. But there was something else their son was completely unaware of. The lands Arthur had inherited from his own father decades ago. Valuable properties in an area now being cut through by a new federal highway. Lands worth millions that Arthur had hidden from the family all these years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The secret had started when Derek turned 18. Arthur, proud of his son, had given him a considerable sum as a birthday gift. It was money the young man was supposed to use for college or to invest in something productive. Instead, Derek spent it all on parties, expensive clothes, and gambling. In 3 months, Not a cent was left. At that moment, Arthur made a decision he would carry for the rest of his life. He would never again trust Derek with information about the family's assets. When his father passed away and left him the lands as inheritance, Arthur registered everything in his and Eleanor's names, but never told his son about the existence of those properties. "I'll drop you off at the guest house where you were staying," said Butch when they entered the city. "Then we'll figure out what to do next." The Buena Vista guest house was on a quiet street in downtown Asheville. It was an old building but well-maintained, run by Mrs. Martha, a friendly woman who had known Arthur since he was young. When she saw the couple arriving again, she realized something was wrong. "Mr. Arthur, I thought you two wouldn't be back until next week," she said, coming out from the reception desk. "There was a change of plans, Mrs. Martha," he replied, embarrassed. "Do you have a room available?" "Of course I do, but—" She hesitated, noticing their downcast state. "Is everything okay?" Eleanor burst into tears again and told Mrs. Martha the whole situation. The guest house owner listened in silence, shaking her head with indignation at every detail of the story. "What an ungrateful son," she murmured when Eleanor finished. "How can he do this to his own parents?" "Do you know any lawyers in town?" asked Arthur. "We need help to sort this out." "Yes, I do. Nathan Sterling Esquerans has an office nearby. He's honest and competent. I'll call him right now." While Mrs. Martha made the calls, Arthur and Eleanor settled into the room. It was simple, but clean and comfortable. Eleanor lay down on the bed, exhausted both physically and emotionally. Arthur sat in the chair by the window and watched the street activity. His thoughts drifted to the hidden lands, properties less than 60 miles away, in an area now appreciating greatly due to the new transportation infrastructure. Nearly 2,500 acres of fertile land, perfect for farming or ranching. Arthur had visited the place a few times over the years, always alone, always in secret. The inheritance had come with a condition imposed by Arthur's own father. The lands could only be sold or divided when there was certainty that the heirs were upright and hard-working people. The old farmer had been very clear: if my grandchildren turn into bums or bad people, these lands should go to those who truly need and deserve them. Arthur had never told this condition to anyone, not even Eleanor. He carried that burden alone, making decisions that affected the whole family without her knowing. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Martha entered the room accompanied by a young woman around 30, with dark hair, average height, and a warm smile. "Mr. Arthur, Mrs. Eleanor, this is Sarah," said Mrs. Martha. "She's a nurse and is also studying to become a lawyer. When I told them about your situation, she offered to help." Sarah approached and greeted the couple kindly. There was something in her eyes that conveyed confidence and determination. "I heard about what happened to you," she said, pulling up a chair to sit near the bed. "I know this must be very hard to go through, but I want you to know you're not alone." "Why do you want to help us?" asked Eleanor, surprised. "You don't even know us." Sarah smiled sadly. "Because I went through something similar. My grandparents were abandoned by their children when they got old. I was a child back then, but I never forgot their suffering. Since then, I promised I would always help people in the same situation." "Sarah works at the hospital as a nurse during the day," explained Mrs. Martha, "and she studies law at night. She's in her last year of college." "Do you have all the documents for the house?" asked Sarah, pulling a notepad out of her bag. "Yes, we do," replied Arthur. "Everything's in the bank safe deposit box. The deed, certificates, everything." "Great. Tomorrow I'll go to the bank with you to check on the situation. If Derek tried to make any illegal transfers, we can reverse that quickly." Eleanor sat up in bed, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time that day. "And the money he took?" "That will be more complicated," admitted Sarah. "If he withdrew it using power of attorney or other legal means, it might be hard to recover. But we'll investigate everything." Arthur shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He knew there were ways to resolve the family's financial situation, but that would mean revealing secrets he had kept for decades. For now, he decided to wait and see how things would unfold. During the night, Eleanor had trouble sleeping. The image of her son shouting from the car window wouldn't leave her head. How had it come to this? Where had they gone wrong in raising Derek? "Arthur," she whispered in the dark, "do you think we did something wrong?" "I don't know, old girl," he replied, also unable to sleep. "Maybe we made everything too easy for him. Maybe we didn't teach him the value of things." "He was always a difficult boy," Eleanor recalled, "since he was little. Remember when he was 12 and stole money from your wallet to buy trading cards?" "I remember," said Arthur, sighing. "And when he turned 15 and got caught drinking with his friends behind the church." "We always thought he would change when he grew up," Eleanor murmured. "That it was just a phase. Maybe he can still change," said Arthur, but his voice carried no conviction. The next morning, Sarah showed up early at the guest house. She was dressed in simple business attire and carried a folder with documents. Arthur and Eleanor had a quick coffee, and the three of them headed to the bank. The manager, Thomas Bennett, received the group in his office. He was a middle-aged man, bald and with glasses, who had known the Miller family for many years. "Mr. Arthur," he said, greeting the farmer, "I was very worried yesterday when I found out what happened." "Can you explain exactly what Derek did?" asked Sarah, taking the lead in the conversation with professionalism. "He showed up here last Monday," the manager began, consulting some papers. "He had a power of attorney signed by his parents and asked to make transfers from the accounts. We checked the documentation and everything was in order." "Power of attorney?" Arthur's eyes widened. "I never signed any power of attorney." "Are you sure?" the manager asked, surprised. Because the signature matched our database, Sarah asked to see the documents. She analyzed them for a few minutes and shook her head. "This signature was forged, and well done at that. Do you have security cameras?" "We do," the manager replied, turning pale. "I'll request the footage immediately." While they waited, Sarah explained to the couple the legal procedures they needed to follow. First, file a police report for document forgery. Then, request a block on any future transactions involving the family's properties. "And about the house?" asked Eleanor. "Derek did try to make a transfer," the manager confirmed after checking other documents. "But it was denied because the deed requires the signatures of both owners. He got very upset and said he'd come back with all the necessary papers." "Thank God," Arthur murmured. When they left the bank, Sarah suggested they have lunch at a nearby restaurant to talk more calmly. It was a simple place, mostly frequented by local merchants and public employees. "Do you have any idea where Derek might be now?" Sarah asked, as they waited for their order. "Probably in Savannah," Eleanor replied. "He has some friends there. People who aren't up to any good, in my opinion." "We'll need to officially notify him about the legal process," Sarah explained. "It's a mandatory legal procedure." Arthur fidgeted nervously with his napkin. He knew there was a quicker way to resolve everything, but that would mean revealing the existence of the other lands. On one hand, he wanted to protect Eleanor from additional stress. On the other, he began to wonder if it wasn't time to tell the truth. "Sarah," he finally said, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Why does someone as young as you dedicate yourself to helping the elderly? I mean, besides the story of your grandparents." Sarah was thoughtful for a moment. "Because I believe society abandons its elderly, and that's an injustice. You've worked your whole lives, raised children, paid taxes, contributed to the community. You deserve respect and care, not abandonment." "And you do this without charging anything?" asked Eleanor. "I do what I can. I work as a nurse to pay the bills and study law so I can help people like you better. My dream is to start an organization that defends the rights of the elderly." Arthur felt something stir in his chest. Sarah's words echoed the last conversations he'd had with his father before he passed away. The old farmer always said the lands should be used to help those who really needed it, not to create lazy and greedy people. After lunch, they returned to the guest house. Sarah said she would look into legal precedents for their case and come back the next day with a more detailed action plan. "One thing I can guarantee," she said before leaving. "You won't be left helpless. One way or another, we'll resolve this situation." That afternoon, Arthur and Eleanor stayed in the room resting. The day had been emotionally intense, and both were tired. Eleanor was dozing on the bed when the guest house phone rang. Mrs. Martha came up to let them know the call was for them. "Hello?" Arthur answered. "Dad?" Derek's voice came from the other end of the line, but there was something different about it. It sounded tense, almost desperate. "Derek," said Arthur, feeling his heart race. "Where are you?" "Dad, I need to talk to you. Something bad happened." "What bad thing?" Arthur gestured to Eleanor, who woke up startled. "I got into a mess here in Savannah. There are some people. They're after me because of money I owe." "What people, Derek?" "Loan sharks, Dad. I bet your money and lost it all. And now they want me to pay it back with interest. It's a lot of money, Dad. Way more than I took from you." Eleanor had approached and could hear the conversation. Her hands were trembling, and her eyes filled with tears once more. "Derek, you didn't do that," she murmured. Mom, forgive me. I didn't want it to come to this. I thought I could multiply your money and give it all back with a profit." "My God in heaven," Eleanor groaned. "Where are you now?" asked Arthur, trying to stay calm. "I'm hiding at a friend's house, but they know I live in Asheville. They said if I don't pay by Friday, they'll go after my family." "What day is it today?" Arthur asked. "Wednesday, Dad. I only have 2 days." Arthur felt the world spin. Not only had Derek stolen their money, but he had also put the whole family in danger. "How much do you owe?" he asked, though he feared the answer. $100,000, Dad." 100,000? Arthur nearly dropped the phone. "Derek, where are we going to get $100,000? The house, Dad. You can sell the house or take out a loan using it as collateral. The house is worth at most $70,000, Derek, and it's the only place we have to live. Dad, for God's sake, help me. These people aren't messing around. If I don't pay—" The call abruptly cut off. Arthur stared at the phone, unable to believe what he had just heard. Eleanor collapsed onto the bed, sobbing. "Now I understand why he abandoned us on the road," she said between tears. "He was running from those people." "And he used us as bait," Arthur added, feeling a deep rage building inside him. "What are we going to do?" Eleanor asked, "if those people come after us?" Arthur sat beside his wife and hugged her. His heart was racing and his mind was working quickly. There was a solution to the problem, but it would change their lives forever. "Eleanor," he finally said, "I need to tell you something I've been hiding for many years." "What is it, Arthur?" He took a deep breath and reached into his pocket, feeling the yellowed envelope. "When my father passed away, he left more than just the farm where we always lived." "What do you mean?" "He had other land, a lot of other land, and I never told anyone." Eleanor stopped crying and looked at him in astonishment. "What other land?" "Nearly 1,000 acres in the Golden Ridge area, land that's now worth a lot of money because of the new highway they're building." "Arthur, are you saying that—" "I'm saying we're rich, Eleanor, very rich, and I hid that from you and Derek all these years." Eleanor pulled away from him, incredulous. "Why did you do that?" "Because when Derek spent that money I gave him when he turned 18, I realized he wasn't ready to handle wealth. And my father had left a condition. The land could only be used if the heirs were people of integrity. And you decided on your own that Derek wasn't a person of integrity." Eleanor's voice carried a mix of surprise and indignation. "No, Eleanor. Derek proved it himself. First with the petty thefts as a teenager, then by blowing the entire inheritance from his 18th birthday in 3 months. And now, this." Eleanor was silent for a long time, absorbing the information. "How much is that land worth?" "The last appraisal I had done was 2 years ago. At the time it was worth about $3 million. Now with the highway, it's probably worth double that." "6 million, Eleanor whispered. "Or more." She got up and walked to the window, watching the street activity. "So you could have prevented all this. You could have given Derek the money before he got mixed up with those dangerous people." "And he would have blown through it all too," Arthur replied. "And then he would have come back asking for more. Don't you see, Eleanor? Giving easy money to Derek only makes things worse. But now our lives are in danger because of your decision." "No," said Arthur, standing up as well. "Our lives are in danger because of Derek's choices. I didn't force him to gamble our money." The two of them fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor tried to process the information that they had been rich all along without knowing it. Arthur wrestled with keeping the secret or using the inheritance to solve the current crisis. "What are we going to do now?" Eleanor finally asked. "I don't know," admitted Arthur. "If I sell part of the land to save Derek, I'll be betraying my father's memory and the purpose for which he left this inheritance. And if we do nothing, we might end up getting hurt by those dangerous people." "Exactly." A knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Mrs. Martha letting them know that Sarah had arrived. Arthur quickly put the envelope back in his pocket and told her to come up. "Good afternoon," said Sarah, entering the room with a worried expression. "I have news about your case." "What kind of news?" asked Eleanor. "I spoke to a colleague who works at the courthouse and found out that this isn't the first time Derek has been involved in document forgery cases. 2 years ago, a company from Savannah filed a complaint against him for attempted fraud." "My God," murmured Eleanor. "It went nowhere because the company dropped the case, but it's still in the records," continued Sarah. "That could complicate his situation if we decide to press charges." Arthur and Eleanor exchanged a glance. They hadn't told Sarah about Derek's call and the loan shark's threat. "Sarah," said Arthur, "I need to tell you something that happened this afternoon." He recounted the entire phone conversation, including the debts to loan sharks and the threat for Friday. Sarah listened in silence, growing visibly concerned. "This changes everything," she said when Arthur finished. "If criminals are involved, you might really be in danger." "What should we do?" asked Eleanor. "First, you need to file a police report about the threats. Second, it might be best for you to leave town for a few days until this gets sorted out." "Where would we go?" asked Arthur. "I have an aunt who lives on a farm about 2 hours from here. It's an isolated and safe place. You could stay there while I handle the legal matters." Arthur felt the envelope in his pocket again. He knew there was another option, one that would solve all the problems immediately. But using the inheritance would mean breaking a promise made to his father and possibly creating even bigger problems in the future. "Let me ask you something," he said to Sarah. "Hypothetically, if someone had the resources to pay off these debts, would that be the best solution?" "It depends," replied Sarah. "From an immediate standpoint, yes, it would solve the threat problem. But from an educational and legal perspective, it would be terrible. Derek would keep thinking he can always count on you to fix the problems he creates. And if we don't pay? Then the situation gets really dangerous. Loan sharks aren't usually understanding or patient people." Eleanor sat back down on the bed, looking older than her 73 years. "How did we get to this point, Arthur? How did our son turn into this?" "Maybe he was always like this," said Arthur bitterly. "Maybe we were just too blind to see it." Sarah noticed the tension between the couple and decided to give them some time to think. "I'll leave you two to talk. I'll come back tomorrow morning and we'll decide what to do. For now, don't leave the guest house alone." After Sarah left, Arthur and Eleanor were once again alone with their thoughts. The silence in the room was heavy, laden with decades of decisions and their consequences. "Arthur," Eleanor finally said, "do you honestly think our marriage can survive yet another secret?" "What do you mean?" "You hid from me for 20 years that we were rich. How can I trust you going forward?" The question hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on protecting the inheritance from their son's greedy hands that he hadn't considered how this would affect his relationship with his wife. "Eleanor, I did this to protect our family." "You did it because you didn't trust me," she replied, "because you thought I wouldn't be able to keep a secret or make the right decisions about our assets." "That's not it." "Yes, it is, Arthur. All these years, you let me worry about money, scrimping and saving on everything, while we had millions tucked away. But we lived well," he argued. "We never went without anything at home. It's not about money, Arthur. It's about trust. It's about partnership. It's about you making decisions that affected my life without consulting me." Arthur sat down beside her, feeling the weight of years on his shoulders. "Forgive me, dear. I thought I was doing the right thing." "And now?" she asked. "Are you going to keep hiding it? Are you going to leave our son in the hands of criminals to protect an inheritance?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm confused. My father was very clear about the conditions of the inheritance. Your father has been resting in peace at the cemetery for 20 years, Arthur. We're the ones who are alive. And Derek, no matter how far he's gone astray, is still our son. That night, neither of them could sleep. Arthur sat in the chair by the window, watching the dark street and reflecting on his wife's words. Eleanor stayed in bed, but with her eyes open, trying to understand how her life had changed so much in such a short time. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit the like button and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us folks who are just starting out. Now, moving on. The next morning they were woken by urgent knocking at the door. Arthur glanced at the clock. It was only 6 in the morning. When he opened it, he found Sarah with a tense expression. "We need to leave here right now," she said without preamble. "What happened?" asked Eleanor, still groggy. "Mrs. Martha called me at 5 this morning. 2 men showed up here during the night looking for you. She said you had left, but they didn't believe her." "How did they find us so fast?" asked Arthur, feeling his blood run cold. "Derek probably told them where you were. Grab your things quickly. My car is around the corner." Within 15 minutes they were in Sarah's car, leaving Asheville by the road leading into the countryside. The young woman drove fast but carefully, constantly checking the rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" asked Eleanor. "To my Aunt Rosemary's farm. It's in the rural area of Victory Creek. It's an isolated place, but comfortable." During the drive, Sarah mentioned she had spent the night researching the loan sharks threatening Derek. She found out they were part of an organization that mainly operated in Savannah, but had contacts in several towns in the interior. "These are dangerous people," she said. "They don't hesitate to use violence to collect debts." "And what can we do?" asked Arthur. "Officially, file a police report and wait for the law to do its job. But we know that can take time, and you need immediate protection." Arthur looked at Eleanor and saw in her eyes the same question that tormented him. Would it be worth using the inheritance to settle everything at once? Aunt Rosemary's farm was at the end of a dirt road surrounded by native forest and cassava fields. It was a small property but well cared for, with a wooden house painted blue and a wide porch where you could sit and watch the birds move about. Rosemary Harrison was a 60-year-old woman, tall and thin, with completely white hair pulled back in a bun. She had the same gentle eyes as her niece and welcomed the couple with genuine warmth. "Make yourselves at home," she said, showing them the room where they would be staying. "You're safe here. Nobody gets here without me knowing." During lunch, Rosemary told her own story. She had lost her husband 5 years ago and had been running the farm alone ever since, with occasional help from neighbors. She knew well the difficulties of life in the countryside and perfectly understood the situation Arthur and Eleanor were going through. "Ungrateful children are a plague," she said, shaking her head. "I've known many families who have gone through this. Greed turns people into creatures you no longer recognize." "Do you think we did something wrong in raising them?" asked Eleanor. "It's not for me to judge," replied Rosemary, "but I can say that each person makes their own choices, regardless of the upbringing they received. I've seen wonderful children come from broken families and terrible children come from model families." After lunch, Sarah said she needed to return to Asheville to handle some legal matters. She promised to come back the next day with news. "In the meantime, you rest," she said before leaving, "and think about what you really want to do about Derek's situation." When they were alone with Rosemary, Arthur felt freer to talk about his concerns. The woman was a good listener and didn't judge, just listened attentively. "Mrs. Rosemary," he finally said, "if you had to choose between saving a child who has lost their way or keeping a promise made to a deceased father, what would you do?" Rosemary was thoughtful for a moment. "What kind of promise?" Arthur looked at Eleanor, who nodded. It was time to share the burden he had been carrying for so long. "My father left an inheritance, but with conditions," Arthur explained. "He said it could only be used if the heirs were honest and hard-working people." "And your son isn't?" asked Rosemary. "He lost his way, and now he's in a dangerous situation because of his own choices." "I see," said Rosemary. "It's a tough decision, but can I ask a question?" "Of course. When your father made that demand, Did he know that someday you might have to choose between the inheritance and your son's life? The question caught Arthur off guard. He had never thought of it from that perspective. I don't think so. He died when Derek was still a child. Then maybe it's time for you to use your own judgment, suggested Rosemary. Your father trusted you to make wise decisions. Maybe the wisest decision now is to adapt the conditions to the current reality. But what if Derek doesn't change? Asked Eleanor. What if he keeps gambling and getting into trouble? Then you set new conditions, replied Rosemary. Use the inheritance to solve the current situation, but make it clear it's the last time, that from now on he has to live with the consequences of his own choices. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car approaching. Rosemary got up and looked out the kitchen window. It's Sarah. She's back earlier than expected. Sarah entered the house with a grave expression. I have bad news. The loan sharks found Derek. What happened? Asked Eleanor, turning pale. He's in the hospital. He got beaten up, but nothing serious. However, they left a clear message. Either the family pays by tomorrow or someone else gets it. Arthur felt his legs give way. He sat down heavily in the kitchen chair and put his head in his hands. There's more, Sarah continued. I found out they know where you are. Someone in Asheville told them about Aunt Rosemary's farm. How? Asked Rosemary, alarmed. I don't know, but they should get here tonight or tomorrow morning. My God, murmured Eleanor. What are we going to do? Arthur lifted his head and looked at the three women. The decision he had put off for so long could no longer be delayed. It was time to break the silence he had kept for decades. Sarah, he said, can you help me sell a property quickly? Depends on the type of property. Why? Arthur pulled the yellowed envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. Because I have the money to pay off Derek's debt. Sarah looked at the envelope curiously. What money? Land I inherited from my father, land worth millions of dollars. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of birds outside. Sarah picked up the envelope and examined the documents inside. Her eyes widened as she saw the deeds and appraisals. Mr. Arthur, this is really worth millions, she said, incredulous. I know. And you were hiding this all this time? I was protecting it. My father said I could only use it if the heirs were honest people. Sarah continued examining the papers. This land is in the area of the new federal highway. With the infrastructure being built, it has appreciated a lot. How long would it take to sell a portion? Asked Arthur. With these documents in order? A few days? Lots of people are interested in land in that area. Then let's do it, Arthur decided. I'll sell enough to pay off Derek's debt and fix our situation. Are you sure? Asked Eleanor. Your father. My father is in heaven, Eleanor, and if he could talk to me now, I'm sure he'd say to save our family. Rosemary stepped closer and placed her hand on Arthur's shoulder. I think you're making the right decision. But we can't do this here, said Sarah. We need to go to Savannah, where the notary offices and more serious buyers are, and that's where Derek is too. It's risky, observed Rosemary. If the loan sharks are looking for you, it's a risk we have to take, said Arthur. I can't keep running from the consequences of my decisions. Sarah thought for a moment. I have a cousin who's a lawyer in Savannah. He can help us with the sale and also negotiate with the loan sharks. That kind of person usually becomes more reasonable when money shows up. When can we go? Asked Eleanor. Right now, if you want. The sooner we sort this out, the better. Rosemary insisted on going with them to the city. She said she wouldn't feel at ease knowing they were facing the situation alone. Within an hour, they were all in Sarah's car, driving toward Savannah. The trip took almost 4 hours, long enough for Arthur to tell Sarah the whole story of the inheritance. He explained how he had discovered the land's value, why he had hidden it from Derek, and how guilty he felt about every decision he had made. Don't blame yourself so much, said Sarah. You did what you thought was best at the time. Now you're doing what you think is best now. That's all anyone can do. I just hope it's not too late, Arthur muttered. Savannah welcomed them with its chaotic traffic and humid heat. Sarah drove straight to her cousin's office, a young lawyer named James Harrison, who worked in a busy commercial district of the city. James was a man in his early 30s, tall and well-dressed, who received the group with professionalism. When Sarah explained the situation, his expression turned serious and he asked to see all the documents. "I know buyers who would be interested in this land," he said after examining the papers. "But are you sure you want to sell? With the new highway, these properties will appreciate even more in the coming years." "I'm sure of it," replied Arthur. "How much could you get for a portion of the land?" "I'll make some calls," said James. "But I believe we can get at least $200,000 for a small parcel. That would be enough to solve your son's situation and still leave something for you to start over." While James was making his contacts, Sarah suggested they go visit Derek at the hospital. It was important for him to know the family was willing to help, but that it would be the last time. Crestview Memorial Hospital was in the city center. Derek was in a room in the general ward, with some bruises on his face and his left arm in a cast. When he saw his parents walk in, he started to cry. "Dad, Mom, forgive me," he said between sobs. "I messed everything up." Eleanor approached the bed and held her son's hand. "We know, Derek, and we came here to fix this." "How?" he asked, surprised. "You don't have that kind of money." "Yes, we do," said Arthur. "We're going to get the money to pay off your debt. But there are conditions." "What conditions?" "First, you're going to check into a clinic to treat your gambling addiction. Second, you're going to work honestly to pay back the money you took from our accounts. Third, you're never going to gamble another cent again." Derek stared at his parents in disbelief. "You'd do that for me, even after everything I've done?" "You're our son," said Eleanor. "But this is also the last chance we're giving you. And if I can't keep the conditions, then you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices," Arthur replied firmly, "because after this, we won't be able to help anymore." Derek was silent for a long time, processing his parents' words. "Where are you going to get this money?" "That's none of your business," said Arthur. "What matters is that you accept the conditions and hold up your end of the deal." "I accept," Derek finally said. "I accept everything. I just want a chance to make up for the mistakes I've made." At that moment, Sarah entered the room. "Excuse me for interrupting. James found a buyer. He wants to meet with you all today." "Great," said Arthur. "Derek, we're going to sort out your situation, but remember what we talked about." "I won't forget, Dad. I promise." The meeting with the buyer took place at James's office. He was a middle-aged businessman who was investing in land near the new highway. When he saw the location and documents for Arthur's properties, he was immediately interested. "I can offer $250,000 for a 100-acre parcel," he said. "Payment in cash, transfer by the end of the week." Arthur looked at Eleanor, who nodded her head. It was more than enough to solve all their immediate problems. "Deal," said Arthur. James handled all the paperwork. In 3 days, the transfer was complete and the money was in Arthur's account. The first step was to pay off the loan sharks who were threatening Derek. James brokered the negotiation, meeting with the organization's representatives at a neutral location. Since there was money involved, they were reasonable and agreed to accept the $100,000 owed, ending any claims against Derek. "Now you're free," James told Derek, "but you're also on your own. They made it clear that if you get mixed up with them again, there won't be any more negotiating." "I understand," Derek replied. "It won't happen again." The next steps were to fulfill the other conditions set by his parents. Sarah had researched clinics specializing in treating compulsive gamblers and found one in Washington, D.C. that had good results. "It's a 6-month treatment," she explained. "Part of the time inpatient, part in outpatient follow-up." "How much does it cost?" asked Arthur. $15,000 for the full program. It was expensive, but Arthur didn't hesitate. His son needed professional help, and now they could afford it. A week later, Derek was admitted to the clinic. It was an emotional farewell at the Savannah airport. For the first time in many years, Arthur saw genuine hope in his son's eyes. "I'll make it, Dad," Derek said, hugging him tight. "I'll beat this and be the son you deserve." "We'll be here when you get back," promised Eleanor. also choked up. With Derek in treatment and the loan sharks paid off, Arthur and Eleanor could finally think about rebuilding their own lives. They decided not to return to Asheville right away. The town held too many bad memories from recent events. Sarah suggested they stay in Savannah for a while, at least until Derek finished his treatment. Rosemary, who had grown fond of the couple, offered her house in the city as a temporary shelter. "You can stay as long as you want," she said. "The house is big, and I enjoy the company." It was during this time that Arthur made a decision that would change the course of their lives forever. Inspired by Sarah's words about helping vulnerable elderly people, he decided to use part of the inheritance to create something meaningful. "Eleanor," he said one morning as they had coffee on Rosemary's porch, "I want to create a place for seniors who have gone through what we did." "What kind of place?" "A care center, a place where people our age who have been abandoned by their families can find support, legal assistance, and a new chance at dignity." Eleanor smiled. It was the first time in months she'd seen her husband speak with such passion about something. "And where would this center be?" "On our land. We can set aside part of it for this project. We'd have space to build proper facilities, create a community garden, maybe even start a small animal farm." "Would it be like a community?" "Exactly. But not just to house people. It would be to give them purpose and dignity again." The idea took shape in the following days. Arthur talked to James about the legal aspects of creating a non-profit organization. Sarah got excited about the project and offered her expertise in law and nursing. "It would be exactly the kind of work I've always dreamed of doing," she said. "You'd give me the chance to fulfill a dream." Rosemary also wanted to get involved. She had experience in farming and could help with the productive side of the center. "I've always believed that having a purpose is what keeps people alive and healthy," she said. Within 2 months the plans were ready. Arthur would sell another portion of land to finance the construction of the facilities. The center would be located on a part of the property that had good infrastructure and access to the nearest town. The project was named Golden Hope Care Center, in honor of the Golden Ridge region where it was located. It would be able to house up to 20 people in small, comfortable homes, with a common area for meals and activities, plus the garden and social spaces. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. While the center was being built, encouraging news came about Derek. The treatment was working, and he had shown significant progress. The doctors reported that he was actively participating in therapy sessions and had demonstrated real understanding of his gambling problem. "He wants to talk to you," said the lead psychologist during a call. "He has some important things to say." The phone conversation was emotional. Derek seemed like a different person, more mature and self-aware. "Dad, Mom," he said, his voice clear and determined, "I want to apologize, not just for what I did recently, but for all the years I was an ungrateful and irresponsible son." "Derek," Eleanor began. "Let me finish, Mom. I had to hit rock bottom to understand how much you've always done for me, and also to realize I was using you as an escape valve for my own problems." "What matters is that you're getting better," said Arthur. "I am, Dad, and I want you to know that when I get out of here, I'll work hard to pay back every dollar I spent of yours, and I'll prove I can be the son you deserve." 2 weeks later, Derek called again. This time, he had a proposal. "Dad, the doctors think I'm ready to start outside activities. I wanted to ask if you'd let me work at the center you're building." Arthur was surprised. "How did you find out about the center?" Sarah told me. "She said you're creating a place to help elderly people abandoned by their families." I thought, well, that it would be a way for me to start fixing the mistakes I made. "Are you sure?" Eleanor asked. "It would be hard work, with no glamour at all." "That's exactly the kind of work I need, Mum. Honest work. Helping people who went through the same things you went through because of me." Arthur talked to the medical team and Sarah. They all agreed it would be an excellent opportunity for Derek to continue his recovery process while doing something constructive. "But with conditions," Arthur said. "He'll work like any other employee, get a salary for the work, and continue his medical follow-up." "Perfect," Sarah agreed. In fact, I think it'll be good for the centre to have someone young and strong to help with the heavy work. The construction of the Golden Hope Care Centre was almost finished when Derek arrived from Washington, D.C. It had been 6 months since he left for treatment, and the change in him was impressive. He was thinner but looked healthy. His eyes had a clarity that Arthur hadn't seen in years. "My God," Eleanor murmured when she saw him getting off the bus. "Is that really our son?" The reunion was emotional, but different from the dramatic hugs of the past. There was a new maturity in Derek, an awareness of the consequences of his actions that hadn't existed before. "Dad, Mom," he said, hugging them. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "We would never give up," Eleanor said, crying. "You're our son." "I know. And now I understand what that really means." Derek was shown around the centre, which was almost ready to welcome its first residents. There were small, colourful houses surrounded by gardens, with a central area where the dining hall, activity room and library were located. The community garden was already producing, and Rosemary had set up a small chicken coop. "It's beautiful," Derek said, walking through the facilities. "You've really created something special here." "Now it's our home too," Arthur said. "We built a house for ourselves at the far end of the property. It was a simple but comfortable house, where Arthur and Eleanor planned to spend the rest of their lives running the centre and taking care of the residents." The first group of residents arrived 2 weeks later. There were 8 people, aged 60 to 80, all with similar stories of abandonment and family troubles. Sarah had made the selection carefully, prioritizing people who truly needed help, but still had the autonomy to participate in community life. Among them was Mr. Harold, a 75-year-old man who had been kicked out of his home by his own son over an inheritance. Mrs. Margaret, 68, had lost her house in a scam pulled by her daughter-in-law. And Mr. Raymond, 72 years old, had been abandoned in a hospital by his children who no longer wanted to take care of him. "It's like a family," Derek observed after the first few weeks. "They take care of each other." "That's exactly what we wanted," said Sarah. "A place where people could find a new family." Derek had adapted well to the work. He helped with facility maintenance, took care of the vegetable garden, and above all, spent a lot of time talking with the residents. His own experience of almost losing his family because of addictions and greed made the elderly identify with him. "You know what's funny?" he commented to Arthur one day. "I always thought manual labor was for losers. Now I've found out that it's precisely this work that makes me feel useful and at peace." "Your grandfather always used to say that honest work ennobles a man," Arthur recalled. "Now I understand what he meant." Derek's transformation did not go unnoticed by the centre's residents. Mr. Harold, who had a difficult temper because of his own traumas, had grown fond of the young man. "That kid has a second chance," he said to Arthur, "just like we had here. It's good to see someone making the most of the opportunity." 6 months after the centre opened, they received an unexpected visit. It was Brenda, Derek's ex-wife, accompanied by a small child about 2 years old. "Derek," she said, visibly nervous, "I need to talk to you." Derek had told his parents about the marriage that had ended badly because of his addictions. Brenda had left him shortly before his hospitalization when she found out about the debts and gambling. "Brenda," Derek's eyes widened, "and this child. She's your daughter, Derek. Her name is Haley." The silence that followed was heavy. Derek looked at the little girl who had his eyes and her mother's facial shape. "My daughter?" he whispered. "I found out I was pregnant shortly after we split. I didn't want to tell you because you were in a really bad place at the time." Arthur and Mrs. Eleanor approached, also impacted by the revelation. They had a granddaughter they didn't know about. "Why are you telling me now?" Derek asked. "Because I heard you were doing better. Sarah told me about the treatment and the work you're doing here. And," she hesitated, "because Haley deserves to know her father, if he's really a different person now." Derek knelt down to the girl's level, who was watching him with curiosity. "Hi, Haley. I'm your daddy." The child smiled and reached out her hand to touch his face. Derek started to cry, but they were tears of joy and emotion. "Brenda," he said, standing up, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything after everything I've done, but would you give me a chance to be a father to her?" "That's why I'm here," Brenda replied, "but with conditions. First, I want to see that you've really changed. Second, any contact with Haley will be gradual and always with me nearby. I'll accept any conditions you want to set. And third," Brenda continued, "if you go back to gambling or using drugs, it's over for good. There won't be any more chances." "That won't happen," Derek promised. "I'd rather die than go back to being the person I was before." The presence of a child brought new energy to the Golden Hope Care Center. The residents enjoyed taking care of little Haley during the visits, which started happening once a week and became more frequent as Brenda saw the real change in Derek. "She looks just like her father when he was a baby," Mrs. Eleanor observed, enchanted with her granddaughter. "But she has her mother's temperament, which is much better," Derek joked. Mr. Harold, who had lost contact with his own grandchildren years ago, became especially attached to the girl. "That child brought joy to my old bones," he would say, always smiling when Haley was around. Brenda, initially suspicious, gradually became convinced that Derek had really changed. She started visiting them more often and even began helping with some of the center's activities. "You created something beautiful here," she said to Arthur, "and Derek, he really isn't the same person anymore." "We're all still learning," Arthur replied, "but I believe people can change when they have enough motivation." A year after the center opened, everyone's transformation was evident. Derek had paid back almost half the money he owed his parents by working at the center and doing some extra jobs around the area. Brenda had started seriously considering a reconciliation. "I don't know if I still love you as a wife," she said to Derek during a frank conversation, "but I respect the man you've become. And Haley needs her father." "I understand," Derek replied, "and I won't pressure you into anything. The important thing is that our daughter has a family, even if it's different from what I once dreamed of. Maybe we can start as friends and see where that takes us," Brenda suggested. "That sounds perfect to me." The Golden Hope Care Center had become a reference in the region. Other towns came to learn about the project so they could set up similar initiatives. Sarah had finished law school and now worked full-time at the center, handling legal matters and coordinating activities. "You made a dream come true that I didn't even know I had," she said to Arthur and Eleanor. "Working here makes me feel like I'm really making a difference in people's lives." Rosemary had moved permanently to the center, where she took care of the garden and the animals. At 65, she had found a new family and a new purpose. "It's funny how life comes full circle," she commented. "I, who always lived alone, am now surrounded by dear people." The residents had truly become a family. They looked out for one another, shared stories and experiences, and found a dignity they had lost when they were abandoned by their original families. Mr. Harold, who had arrived bitter and distrustful, was now one of the liveliest. He had started teaching carpentry to Derek and other volunteers, passing on skills he had accumulated over decades of work. "I know what's different here compared to where I used to live," he said to Arthur. "Here I'm useful. Here I have value." Mrs. Margaret had set up a small sewing workshop where she taught other residents and volunteers from the community. Her work became known in the area and brought in a small extra income for the center. "I never thought that at 70 I'd be teaching young people," she said, laughing. "Life really doesn't end until you die." 2 years after the center opened, Derek made a formal request to his parents. "Dad, Mom, I want to talk about something serious with you." Arthur and Eleanor sat with him on the house porch, where they usually had coffee in the late afternoons. Haley, now 4 years old, played in the garden with some of the center's younger residents. "I've paid back almost all the money I owed you," Derek began. "There's only about $15,000 left." "We know," said Eleanor, "and we're proud of your effort. I want to make a proposal. Instead of paying that remaining money, I'd like to invest it in improvements for the center. I had an idea to create a play area for the children who come visit their grandparents here." Arthur smiled. It was exactly the kind of thinking he had hoped to see in his son, shifting the focus from himself and thinking of others. "Tell me more about this idea," he asked. "Well, A lot of people here get visits from grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but we don't have a proper space for the kids to play. I thought about making a playground, maybe a covered area for rainy days." "That's a great idea," said Eleanor, "and it shows you truly understand the purpose of this place. So you accept?" "We do," replied Arthur, "but not because it's a way for you to pay off your debt. We accept because it's a good proposal, and because you've shown you deserve our trust again." "Thank you, Dad. This means a lot to me." The recreation area was built over the following months. Derek coordinated the entire project, from planning to execution. When it was finished, they organized an opening party with all the families in the area. It was that day that Brenda made a decision she had been mulling over for months. When Derek was playing with Haley in the new playground, surrounded by other children and several smiling elderly folks, she approached Arthur. "Mr. Arthur," she said, "I want to talk to you about Derek." "About what exactly?" "About us. About the possibility of us trying to be a family again." Arthur looked at his son, who was now helping Mr. Harold fix one of the toys. "Are you sure?" "I am. He's proven he's changed. Not just for me, but for you, for the people here, for our daughter, and—" She smiled. "I still love him. I love the man he's become." "And does he know?" "I'll tell him tonight." The conversation between Derek and Brenda happened at the end of the party, when everyone was packing up the decorations and cleaning the place. Haley had fallen asleep in her grandfather Arthur's lap, exhausted from all the playing. "Derek," said Brenda, pulling him aside to a more private spot, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" he asked, noticing the seriousness in her tone. "I want us to try again. I want us to be a family." Derek was silent for a moment, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Brenda, are you sure? After everything you went through because of me?" "I'm sure. You're not the same person who married me. You're someone better. Someone I can love and respect. But I still have a lot to learn. I'm still building the person I want to be." "We'll build it together," she said, taking his hands. "Me, you, and Haley." Derek hugged her, feeling a happiness he hadn't experienced in years. "I love you, Brenda. And I promise I'll never let you or our daughter down again." "I know," she whispered. "Now I know." Derek and Brenda's wedding was held 6 months later in a simple ceremony right at the Golden Hope Care Center. All the residents participated, and the party stretched late into the night. "I never imagined I'd see my son getting married here," Eleanor commented to Arthur during the party. "Nor that we'd see him become the man he is today," replied Arthur. "I think my father would be proud." "I think so too. You used your inheritance exactly as he would have wanted, to raise upstanding people and help those in need." 3 years later, the Golden Hope Care Center was a success story. It housed 25 people, had a waiting list for new residents, and had inspired the creation of similar centers in other states. Derek and Brenda had moved into their own house near the center, but continued working there daily. Haley, now 7 years old, considered the residents her adopted grandparents, and spent her afternoons playing and learning with them. "Daddy," she said one day to Derek, "why does Grandpa Arthur have so much land but live in a small house?" Derek smiled. "Because he learned that the size of the house doesn't matter when you have a big, happy family." "Oh," said Haley, as if that explained everything. "And why don't the grandpas here live with their own kids?" It was a harder question to answer. "Sometimes kids forget how important it is to take care of their parents," Derek explained, "but here, they found a new family that loves them." "How did you find us again?" "Exactly. How did I find you again?" Sarah had married James, the lawyer cousin from Savannah, and both moved to the region to dedicate themselves full-time to the center. They had created a legal department that helped seniors across the state with inheritance issues, family abandonment, and social security rights. "You didn't just save your own lives," Sarah told Arthur and Eleanor during a center board meeting. "You saved dozens of lives and created a model that's spreading across the country." "We just used what we had to do good," Arthur replied modestly. "Exactly, and that made all the difference. Rosemary, now 70, had become the most respected person at the center. Her life experience and practical wisdom turned her into the confidant of all residents. "You know what's funny?" she commented to Eleanor. "I, who always lived alone, now can't imagine life without all these people around me." "That's how it should be," Eleanor replied. "No one should grow old alone." The center had developed several innovative programs. Besides the community garden and craft workshops, they had created a literacy program for seniors, basic computer classes, and even a choir that performed at events in the region. Mr. Harold had become the leader of the woodworking workshop, where he taught not just techniques, but also patience and attention to detail. "Working with wood teaches you that good things take time to finish," he told his apprentices. Mrs. Margaret coordinated the sewing workshop, which now produced clothes and accessories sold in a small store in the nearest town centre. The income helped maintain the centre and gave residents a sense of purpose and productivity. "I've never been this happy in my whole life," she told Arthur at the centre's 5th anniversary. "Here I have family, work, and dignity. Everything a person needs." The centre's impact went beyond its direct residents. Relatives who had abandoned their seniors started showing up, wanting to re-establish contact. Not all were welcomed, but some managed to rebuild relationships that seemed lost forever. "It's interesting," Derek observed. "When people see their parents are well cared for and happy elsewhere, sometimes it awakens a remorse in them they didn't know they had. Or maybe it awakens a conscience that was asleep," Brenda suggested. One of the most striking cases was that of Mrs. Clara, an 80-year-old woman who had been abandoned by her daughter at a hospital in Savannah. 2 years after arriving at the center, the daughter showed up wanting to take her back. "Now that Mom is better, I can take care of her at home," the daughter said. "But I don't want to go," Mrs. Clara replied firmly. "Here I have my real family." The daughter was shocked by the answer. "But I'm your daughter." "You were my daughter," Mrs. Clara corrected, "until the day you left me alone in a hospital and never came back. Now these people are my family." It was a harsh lesson, but a necessary one. Mrs. Clara's daughter ended up leaving alone, but the case served to establish a clear policy at the center. No resident would be forced to return to relatives who had abandoned them. "Family isn't just blood," Rosemary told the residents during one of the community meetings. "Family is who stays by your side when you need them." Everyone nodded in agreement. They had learned from experience that emotional bonds can be stronger than biological ones. Arthur, now 82, had become a kind of patriarch, not just for his own family, but for the entire center community. His life experience and the lessons learned from Derek's situation had turned him into a respected counselor. "Mr. Arthur," said Mr. Harold in one of those conversations, "do you think you did the right thing by hiding your son's inheritance for so long?" It was a question Arthur often asked himself. "I don't know if it was right or wrong," he replied honestly, "but I know the consequences were good. If I had given the money to Derek when he was young, he probably would have wasted it all and never learned the lessons he did." "And you never would have created this place," added Mr. Harold. "Exactly. Sometimes the hardest path is the one that leads to the best destinations." Eleanor, at 78, had found a calling she didn't know she had: telling stories. On Sunday afternoons, she gathered all the children visiting the center and told old tales, legends from the region, and even adventures made up on the spot. "Grandma Eleanor," said Haley one Sunday, "tell the story of Grandpa who hid a treasure." "What story is that?" asked Eleanor, smiling. "The story of Grandpa Arthur. He hid a treasure and then used it to do good things." Eleanor looked at Arthur, who was sitting on the porch listening to the conversation. "That's a very beautiful story," she said. "And it's true." "Are all your stories true?" asked one of the other children. "The best stories are the ones that could be true," replied Eleanor. "Even when we make them up, we're talking about things that can really happen in people's lives." The tradition of Sunday stories became one of the most anticipated activities at the center. Not just children, but many adults and seniors came to listen to Eleanor, who had a natural talent for captivating her audience. Sarah and James had had 2 children who grew up considering the center their second home. It's wonderful to raise kids in an environment where they learn from an early age to respect and care for the elderly, Sarah commented. And where they learn that family can take many different forms, James added. The centre had also become a place of learning and research. Universities sent students of geriatrics, social work and psychology to intern and see the community care model developed there. "You've created something that should be replicated across the entire country," said a professor from the State University of Appalachia during a visit. "It's a model of how society should care for its elderly." "We just did what we thought was right," Arthur replied. "The credit goes to everyone who works here every day." Derek, now 42, had become the centre's official administrator. His personal growth was evident not only in his work, but in every aspect of his life. He was a present father to Haley, a caring husband to Brenda, and a respectful son to Arthur and Eleanor. "Sometimes I wonder where I'd be if you hadn't given me that last chance," he said to his parents one quiet evening. "Probably in jail or worse," Arthur replied, "but that doesn't matter. What matters is where you are now." "And where we'll be in the future," Derek added. "I have plans to expand the centre, create new programs, help even more people. Just don't forget that size isn't the most important thing," Eleanor warned. "What makes this place special is the care we put into every detail." "I won't forget, Mom. I'll never forget what really matters again." Brenda had resumed her career as a teacher and taught at the local school where Haley studied. In the afternoon, she came to the centre to help with educational activities for the residents. "I never thought I'd find my calling working with the elderly," she said, "but teaching people in their 70s and 80s is an incredible experience." "Why?" asked Haley, curious. "Because they have a lot to teach too," Brenda replied. "It's a constant exchange of knowledge and experience." The Golden Hope Care Centre had achieved its own sustainability. Beyond sales from the vegetable garden and the workshop, they received donations from people familiar with their work, and even small government contracts for services. "The important thing is not to rely on a single funder," explained James during a board meeting. "That's how we secure our independence and continuity. We also prove it's possible to create something self-sustaining that truly works," added Sarah. 10 years after the centre opened, when Arthur turned 85, the community organized a big celebration. People came from several towns in the region, government representatives, researchers, and most importantly, families of other elderly individuals who had been inspired by the example. "Mr. Arthur," said the mayor of Asheville during his speech, "you turned a personal tragedy into hope for hundreds of people. That's what I call true leadership." "I didn't do it alone," Arthur replied when it was his turn to speak. "Everything we've done here is the result of the joint effort of many people who believe the elderly deserve dignity and respect." "But the idea was yours," someone in the audience insisted. "The idea was my father's," Arthur corrected. "He said the inheritance should be used to help those who truly need it. I just took a few decades to fully understand what he meant." During the party, Haley, now 15, gave a special presentation. She had prepared an album with photos and testimonials from all the centre's residents over the years. "This place saved my father's life," she told the audience, "but it also saved all our lives, because here we learned that family is much more than blood. It's choice, it's care, it's daily love." The audience applauded, moved. Arthur's eyes welled up as he watched his granddaughter articulate so clearly the values he had taken decades to grasp. "Grandpa," said Haley, approaching him after the presentation, "I want you to know that when I grow up, I'm going to keep taking care of this place." "You don't have to do that, my dear," Arthur replied. "You should follow your own dreams." "This is my dream, Grandpa. I grew up here. I learned here that taking care of people is the most important thing there is. I want to study to become a geriatrician and come back to work at the centre." Arthur hugged his granddaughter tightly. Seeing that the next generation had understood the values he had fought for was the greatest reward he could receive. That night, after all the guests had left and the centre returned to its quiet routine, Arthur and Eleanor sat on their house's porch, as they did every night. "We did it, didn't we, my love?" he said, holding his wife's hand. "Did what?" "We built a real family. Not just Derek and Haley, but this whole community. We turned my father's inheritance into something that will last forever." "I think your father would be proud," said Eleanor. "You used the inheritance exactly as he would have wanted, to raise people of integrity and help those in need." "And you?" asked Arthur. "Do you forgive me for hiding everything for so long?" Eleanor smiled. "I forgave you a long time ago. Actually, I think if you had told me sooner, we might never have gotten here. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations." "I love you, Eleanor." "I love you too, Arthur. And I love the life we built together." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of the countryside at night. Crickets, frogs, the wind in the trees. It was a comfortable silence, filled with good memories and hopes for the future. "You know what makes me happiest?" said Eleanor finally. "What?" "Knowing that even when we're no longer here, all of this will continue. Derek learned, Haley is learning, Sarah and James will handle the legal side. The center will outlive us." "That's the real legacy," agreed Arthur. "Not the land or the money, but the values and the care we managed to pass on." "Exactly. And no one can steal or waste that." Years later, when Arthur and Eleanor were no longer with them, the Golden Hope Care Center continued to flourish. Derek had become a respected leader in geriatric care. Haley was studying medicine with a specialization in geriatrics, and Sarah had founded a non-profit that replicated the model in other states. The house where Arthur and Eleanor lived was turned into a small museum that told the center's story and welcomed visitors interested in learning about the project. At the entrance, a bronze plaque bore a phrase Arthur used to repeat: "True wealth lies in using what we have to care for those we love." Rosemary, at 85, still tended the garden with help from younger volunteers. She had become the center's living memory, telling new residents and visitors how it all began. "This all came from a betrayal, you know," she would always say. "Their son abandoned them on the road, but that's what brought all of us into this family. Mr. Harold had passed away at 90, but not before teaching his woodworking techniques to a new generation of apprentices. His workshop was kept exactly as he left it, with his tools and unfinished projects that others carried on. Mrs. Margaret had passed at 88, leaving behind a thriving atelier that now employed several women from the region. Her sewing techniques were taught to anyone interested, keeping alive the traditions she had helped create. The center now housed 40 people and had a waiting list that stretched for months. But it never lost the close-knit community feel that Arthur and Eleanor had dreamed of. Derek, at 50, had become a national reference in community-based elder care. He traveled the country helping other communities implement similar projects, but always came back home to the center that was at the heart of his personal transformation. "Dad always said the best lessons in life come from the hardest experiences," he said in an interview for a national magazine. "I nearly destroyed my family out of greed and immaturity. But that fall taught me the real value of things: relationships, honest work, and above all using what we have to help others." Haley had graduated from medical school and returned to work at the center, as she had promised her grandfather years before. At 25, she was the youngest geriatrician in the region and had developed innovative care protocols being studied at universities across the country. "I grew up seeing that aging doesn't have to mean abandonment," she said in her doctoral thesis. The Golden Hope Care Center proved it's possible to create care models that preserve the dignity, autonomy, and happiness of the elderly. Brenda had become the center's educational director, developing programs that connected generations. Children from local schools regularly visited the center to learn from the elderly, building bonds that benefited both groups. "The wisdom our elders have accumulated is a treasure that can't be wasted," she would say in her talks. "Every person here has stories, knowledge, and experiences that can enrich the new generations." Sarah and James had expanded their legal work, creating a law firm specializing in elder rights that served the entire state of Appalachia. They managed to pass municipal laws that protected the elderly from family abandonment and funded care centers. What started as an isolated case turned into a social movement, Sarah said during a session at the state legislature. "We proved that it's possible to age with dignity when society organizes itself to do so." The Golden Hope Care Center model had been replicated in 14 states across the country, always maintaining the core principles: community care, respect for the elderly's autonomy, financial sustainability, and preservation of healthy family bonds. Each new center adapted the model to local realities, but all kept the central philosophy Arthur had learned from his father: use the available resources to care for those who truly need it. At a national meeting of the centers, 10 years after the network was created, Derek gave a speech that summed up the family's journey. "My father hid an inheritance because he thought I wasn't ready to handle wealth. He was right. But when he finally revealed the secret, it wasn't to give me money. It was to teach me that true wealth lies in using what we have to create something bigger than ourselves. Today, hundreds of families have a new chance at dignity because of a decision my father made 20 years ago, and thousands of people have learned that aging can be a rich and meaningful experience when we are not alone." The inheritance my grandfather left wasn't just land. It was a lesson about integrity, hard work, and compassion. A lesson my father kept, protected, and ultimately used to transform lives. And now that legacy lives on, not in bank vaults or properties, but in the hearts and minds of all the people who have learned that taking care of each other is what makes us truly rich. The audience rose in a long ovation. There were representatives from all the centers in the network, families that had been reunited, professionals who had found their calling, and most of all, hundreds of elderly people who had found a new way to live their golden years. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of overcoming and family. Do you believe Arthur made the right decision by hiding the inheritance for so long? Leave your opinion in the comments and share if you know similar cases in your family or community. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel for more touching stories like this one.